Hi, I'm Chuck Colson with this week's 2-Minute Warning. You are all going to die. Now, that's a truism, but then again, truisms by definition are true. However, they're the kind of truths we often overlook. In this case, a recent column by David Brooks in the New York Times got me to thinking about how the fact that we are going to die shapes the way we live. In particular, that's so in the budget debate. Brooks uses the story of a Times colleague who is dying from Lou Gehrig's disease to remind us that even the most advanced technology can only postpone death. Eventually, many of us are going to come to a point where huge sums of money will only buy us a bit more time. Since this bit more time is largely paid for out of the public purse, Brooks draws the connection between our fear of death and the budget and fiscal crisis in Washington. Brooks writes, "This fiscal crisis is about many things, but one of them is our inability to face death, our willingness to spend our nation into bankruptcy to extend life for a few more sickly months." Well, that's a valuable insight, and he's absolutely right that we as a society must begin to emphasize care as much as cure, especially when a cure is not possible. But it's a little scary. Brooks takes this insight and goes in a direction that's reminiscent of former Governor Richard Lamb in Colorado, who famously said that the elderly have a duty to die. Now, I hope that wasn't Brooks' intention, because he identifies so well that death is simply an unavoidable part of life, that life is not just breathing and existing as a self-enclosed skin bag, it's doing the activities with others that you were put on earth to do. In other words, biological life, now think about this, biological life is not the ultimate good. An honorable life, well lived in service to God and neighbor, is. And Brooks is right about this. Our society's fear of death distracts us from pursuing a well-lived life. But the fear of death shouldn't distract the Christian. Since the disciples first encountered the risen Christ, Christians have understood what non-Christians can't. Death has lost its sting. The grave is not the end. This has powerful implications this side of the grave. As John Wesley once famously said, "Good Methodists die well." Well, what Wesley said about Methodists should be true of all Christians. As the letter to Hebrews says, the fear of death once held us in slavery. Not fearing death sets us free. Specifically, it sets us free to serve others. We no longer have to seek fulfillment this side of eternity, since we know that it is but an infinitesimal part of the story of our life, which is hidden with Christ in God. Hard to imagine a better witness to this freedom than modeling what it means to die well in a world whose actions are largely driven by fear of death. Caring for the sick, the elderly, and the dying in a world where such acts of human decency are increasingly outsourced would speak more loudly and more eloquently than words. And when our time comes, we must show the world how we die, infinitely more important than when we die. Will this help the nation's fiscal situation? Maybe not. While the country's fiscal health is important, our primary task is to be ambassadors of that better country that God has prepared for those set free from the fear of death by the resurrection of his Son. Come to colsoncenter.org for some great resources and articles and books on dying by great thinkers. Richard John Newhouse' book, As I Lay Dying, is a classic. And Leon Kass, the brilliant Jewish philosopher, has written some powerful things. I wrote a chapter on dying well in my book, The Good Life. Read, learn, dig deeper. Remember, death is part of every life every single one of us experience, and we'd be well to prepare for it with eternity in mind. I'm Chuck Colson. That's this week's 2-Minute Warning.